All right, we are live. This is First Draft Friday. I'm Alessandra Torre. I am joined today with Lou Aronica and John Adcox, and we are going to be talking about draft fiction, which I am so excited about. I was talking to a couple authors yesterday about doing this, and they said four act, that's not right. It should be 3 act. And I was like, well, just tune in and see. So I'm really excited for this topic and to chat with you guys. I will let you each do your own introduction. So Lou, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I'm Lou Aronica. I'm the publisher of The Story Plant. I have been in the book business forever. I am also a New York Times bestselling author, multiple New York Times bestselling author. And you know, just endlessly fascinated with the book world, and so delighted to be here. John?
First of all, Lou, you need to let me do your introduction next time. You really undersell yourself.
It's true.
My name is John Adcox. I am a first-time author. My debut novel, Raven Wakes the World, just came out this month, and I've been absolutely thrilled with how it's doing so far. I'm also the CEO of a company called Gramarye Media, where Lou is one of my business partners. We're sort of a next generation book publisher and movie studio of the future. That's me.
I love it. All right. It's great to have both of you guys. Congratulations on your book release. That's always a really exciting time. So let's dive right in. I believe that we have a slide, but also we're just going to talk openly for the next half hour. So if this is your First Draft Friday, sit back and enjoy. So I'll let you guys begin.
Sounds good. So this is a shorter version of a talk called the Storytellers Toolbox. The longer version also goes into things like character and milieu that are very important to the storytelling process. And if you'd like to see the whole thing, there's a video of it on my website at johnadcox.com. But today we're focusing on structure, because when we've run novels through Marlowe, the thing that we found most helpful was how it looks at things like pacing and structure. Lou, I think, would be the first to agree with me on that.
Yeah, it's been tremendously helpful, actually, to see the structure of the book plotted out in that way, and has actually influenced a couple of editorial conversations.
By the way, did you run Blue, your novel?
I did, yes, I did. It was perfect, of course. But,
the shining gold standard.
But you know, there were actually some interesting things in it. You know, and it's funny. This is a longer conversation, but you know, there are interpretations of pacing. You know, and you know, something that what Marlowe was seeing as a downbeat was actually a place where emotions were simmering. And you know, it's just a fascinating thing to sort of remind yourself that if you don't make that as active as you think you're making it, you might be taking something away from the reader.
And just to jump in really fast, for those of you who are listening and maybe haven't watched a First Draft Friday before or aren't aware of who Marlowe is, when we're referring to Marlowe, Marlowe is a AI developmental editor. So if you visit Authors A.I, the website, you can upload your manuscript and she can give a report that shows your plot and your pacing and structure of your novel. So that when we say Marlowe, we're referring to the AI Marlowe. Sorry, go ahead.
So this is my book, and my contact information, as well as Raven Wakes the World, is a page within my site. So if you're looking for the video of the longer talk, that's where you'll find it. So we're talking mostly about structure in this talk. Like I said, this is the last third of a much longer talk. But structure, I think, is what Marlowe does that's most interesting. So I'm going to walk you through structure really quickly, and then end with how my understanding of structure matches what Marlowe's AI algorithm does. Most of what we know of structure began with Aristotle, who, according to Wikipedia, looked rather like this. His idea of structure was this chart. Now, Unfortunately, this is basically the axis of time, meaning the story begins somewhere and meanders on until it comes to an end. And unfortunately, this is how most first-time writers, I'm not thinking of anybody in this room in particular, think of story and think of structure, which is why so many first drafts feel very episodic, and they don't have that sort of page-turning pace that makes you want to stay awake and read under the flashlight, under the covers with a flashlight. But Aristotle also added a dot to his time, and this is very important. It's what he called the reversal of the recognition. In comedy, it's a reversal where the story changes direction and goes to an inevitable conclusion. In tragedy, it's a recognition where something is realized that leads the tragic hero to an inevitable fate. So the point is, you come to a point in your story that's about 25% from the end or 75% from the beginning of your story, where something changes and leads it to an inevitable conclusion. And this was our understanding of structure until the 15th century, when a playwright named Lope de Vega introduced what we now know as the famous three-act structure. He basically took Aristotle's timeline and added another dot. This was separated the first act from a middle act from a final act. Now, Lope de Vega did it basically to introduce bathroom breaks and food breaks in his plays, but it still really, really works with how we understand story in the future. In Act 1, you're sort of introducing the nature of the story. You're making the case. In the middle act, there follows inevitable conflict. And then finally in Act 3, you resolve the case. So this is your basic three-act structure. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's pretty hard to argue with. By the way, as we go through this top, you'll see a lot of dots like this. They're important. They do more than just divide acts because they're points of causality. They cause the next parts of the story to happen. That's why they divide acts, because they cause a turn in the story that's really, really important. Actually, the idea of calling these a point of causality rather than an act break is an idea I got from Lou.
Well, and I think actually, just to address the point for 1 second, I think most writers, most first-time writers certainly, but most writers right across the board would say that the hardest part of writing a book is writing the middle of the book. Because you have some sense, if you know the story well, you have some sense of what's causing the action to happen, and you have some sense of where you want to take the story at the end. And then you have this long middle part that it feels squishy. It often feels squishy even if you've written 20 novels. There's a reason for that, right, John?
I think so. And in fact, I also think this is the leading cause of writer's block, is you just don't know the points of causality.
Someone would say that not storyboarding ahead of time would be the leading cause of writer's block, but that's a different conversation.
Well, it's probably the same thing, though.
Probably it's the same thing. Yes.
So this was our understanding of structure until the 19th century, when Gustav Freytag added another axis and another dot. The axis is over here on the left, and this is the axis of tension, and I'll go into that. He also added another dot at the very end, and what that is it basically says there is a point where the story ends, but the world of the story continues past it. So if you think about the ending of Star Wars, where you have that medal ceremony, but you've also just seen that Darth Vader's alive, so you know there's more story to tell. The end of Hamlet, where most everybody is dead, but the few characters that are left to sort of clean up the mess, you know that their story is going to continue. The world doesn't end when the story does. So Freytag's axis is the axis of tension. And tension begins to rise from the beginning of your story. There's an instigating incident at the beginning that sort of tells you this is why the story begins here and not at some point later. Hamlet comes home. Rick Blaine in Casablanca gets presented with the letters of transit. That starts that story going. That's why it starts on that day and not the day before or the week before or the week after. But the tension begins to rise until you get to the reversal, and then it starts to decline as it gets to an inevitable conclusion. So your story is always about raising that level of tension, and until you get to an end. I think understanding what tension is really important to storytelling, and this is one of the things I think that what Marlowe is looking for when it's looking for its action beats, if you will. And there's a mathematical formula for how to define tension. It looks like this: hope versus fear equals tension. We hope something will happen. We're afraid something else will happen. And when you have those two things wrestling with each other, your story's working, and you have people turning the page, and you have people staying up late to read under the colors under the flashlight.
I love that equation. I haven't heard that before. To write down.
It's easy to remember.
Yeah. Hope versus fear. I love it.
So this is our basic understanding of 3-act structure. And in the movie world, this first dot is called plot point 1. That's where the story makes a major turn. You've introduced the world of the story. You've had an instigating incident that started the story, but now something happened that turns it. In Casablanca, it's when the woman from Rick Blaine's past re-enters his life and turns everything upside down. And the tension is continuing to rise until you get to plot point 2, or the reversal, which turns it again towards the ending. Anything you want to add here, Lou? Now, in a screenplay, this is about 30 minutes of time. And the last act is also about 30 minutes of time. And the middle act is 60 minutes of time. So there's a little bit of imbalance here. And this works the same with a novel. If you're writing a 100,000 word novel, which, by the way, I chose because it made the math easy, your first 25K words are going to be your first act. There's 50,000 words in the middle, and then another 25,000 to make the end. That makes 50,000 words. But it's still imbalanced. But this is your 3-act structure. It's really, again, hard to argue with. You have a beginning. You have something that changes the direction of the story. You have a middle part where all the conflict happens. And then you have something that shifts it toward the ending, right? But there's something that happens in the middle. And it has a name. It's called the midpoint. And the weird thing is this midpoint acts exactly the same way as a plot point does. It also turns the story in a different direction. And a lot of times you'll actually see this referred to as Act 2A and Act 2B, which frankly I think is a bit silly. There's an easier way to do it. And frankly, again, I think this works beautifully if you're just talking about the external action of your story, the events. But, and this is another lesson I learned from Lou, what's more important than the events of your story is what's happening to the character and the growth of the character. You were about to say something, Lou?
Oh, that was great.
Oh, yeah. So if you're thinking about how the events drive changes in your character, it needs to be a 4-act structure. And it looks just like this. And the reason for this is because your characters go through changes. And I'll give you an example as we go forward. In the first act, your character is in some way an orphan. Think of Rick Blaine in Casablanca. He's isolated himself from his past and from the world and has become a cynical, isolated shell. And then something happens. Elsa comes back, and he's shifted out of that shell he's built for himself, but he's not directing his own actions. Something is changing him. He's a wanderer. And then at the midpoint, something shifts again, and he becomes a warrior. And then finally, a martyr. Now, you also hear the last act as the enlightenment act, where the character has realized something. But I like the orphan, wanderer, warrior, martyr structure, because I think that makes it really, really elegant to understand the journey that your character is going through. And by the way, this doesn't just work with an individual character. It also works with an ensemble. The Big Chill does this just beautifully, where not only does each character have their own arc and their own orphan, wanderer, warrior, martyr journey, there's also an arc for the entire ensemble, their friendship.
And I think one of the key points here, just for, I keep thinking of new writers or developing writers when talking about this kind of thing. I think the key that this difference underscores is that what it's saying is that there's an important action point that has to happen halfway through your middle, where whatever the characters are doing or whatever the main character is doing, by the middle of the middle, that those characters need to be actually engaged in the action that's going to take them through to Act 4. And I think one of the core problems that a lot of writers face is thinking that action is the thing that happens at the beginning of Act 3, and it really isn't. It's the thing that happens in the beginning of in the middle of what we've been traditionally calling Act 2.
I couldn't agree more. So each one of these plot points changes the direction of your story and changes your character's journey somehow. And if you've done your work well, they make that change inevitable. Now you can also break this down even further. Break each act into 2 mini acts. My friend and one of our Gramarye teammates is a guy named Chris Soth, who calls this the mini movie method. He's talking about screenwriting, but it works just as well for novels. Each one of these little movies is a little self-contained story with its own intention. And again, I'll give you an example as we go forward. Your first act is 2 mini acts that make the orphan part of the story. And again, it's 15 minutes or 12,500 words in a novel. Again, if you're writing 500, if you're 100,000 words. If you're writing fewer or more than that, you have to do your own math. But most computers and phones come with a calculator, so you'll be fine. And again, the second act, same thing, 15 minutes. And I'm going to give you an example. I used the original Star Wars movie because I thought that everybody on the planet had seen it until I gave this talk at a university and found that so many of the kids there had not. In Star Wars, the main character is Luke Skywalker. But the first little mini story isn't about Luke at all. It's about R2-D2 and C-3PO. Because the movie begins when Princess Leia puts the message in R2. That's what starts the story going. Because that message she puts in R2-D2 is the driving thing of the story, the MacGuffin, as they say. So the 15-minute story is about R2 and 3PO getting away and trying to get to a place of safety. So we hope that they'll get away from the Empire and they'll get through the desert. But we're afraid that the Empire will catch them and blow them up. So that tension is what drives the story. Now, the second act, that story ends when they get to Luke Skywalker. And then the story becomes about Luke. And the next part is Luke wanting to leave and go have adventures, but feeling trapped in his home. And he goes off, he meets Obi-Wan Kenobi and learns about the Force and the Jedi and has his opportunity to get what he wants. He wants to go off and have adventures, but he's trapped in his home. His uncle and aunt make him stay on the farm. And that act changes when plot point 1 happens. That's when he goes back and sees that the Empire has killed his mother and father. Or I'm sorry, his uncle and aunt. So he can't go back. He must go forward. He must follow Obi-Wan and become a Jedi. So this is the act where Luke is an orphan. The first 15-minute is a little mini story about R2 and 3PO getting away from the Empire. The second part is about Luke wanting to go off and have adventures. And at the end of that half hour, plot point 1 happens, almost right on the dot. And you can take your watch to a movie, which, by the way, will absolutely ruin movies for you. I saw a movie called, I think it was No Way Out with Kevin Costner. And I was with a date, and she kept asking me, "Why are you checking your watch? Are you bored?" I was like, "No, I'll tell you later." And the question was trying to figure out who's the Russian spy. And I looked at my watch right when plot point 2, that would lead you to the end, was happening. And I said, "Oh, character A is the spy, right?" And she's like, "How did you know?" It's because I knew that that was the point in the movie where there would be a plot point, and the only character on screen that could possibly be the Russian spy was that character, because I understood structure. So I've learned not to look at my watch during movies anymore and just get lost in the story. But when you go back later, it's a great tool for you. So that's the first act. It's too many stories that are self-contained, and this is Luke's journey as an orphan. He's literally an orphan. He lives with his aunt and uncle, just like Harry Potter is literally an orphan. Rick Blaine in Casablanca is a metaphorical orphan, but in some way your character is an orphan. The next act is the Wanderer act. Luke has decided to follow Obi-Wan Kenobi, but he doesn't know where he's going. He's like, "I'm going to come with you." He's not making decisions. So he goes off, he goes to the bar, to the first threshold. He meets his first helpers and manages to get off Tatooine, and doesn't reach his destination, but he gets somewhere. And that's the end of a little 15-minute mini story. Him leaving his farm, getting off Tatooine, and arriving at the next destination, which unfortunately happens to be the Death Star. Now, for the next 15 minutes, you have another little mini story where Luke is still a wanderer. And that's a story about them planning to get off the Death Star, where Obi-Wan goes to turn off the tractor beam. And Luke and Han are supposed to wait. But something happens at the exact midpoint of the story. That's when Luke realizes that Princess Leia is on the station and decides they have to go rescue her. Now, Han Solo is arguing, saying, no, the old man wants us to wait right here. But Luke says, "No, we have to go rescue her." He is now making decisions and driving his own story. He is now a warrior.
That's where the key action begins. The action toward the conclusion of the story really starts right there.
I agree. Yeah. So he.
So we're taking the 4 acts and then dividing them into almost 2 acts per, or 2
little mini stories.
Or mini stories per act. So your 4-act structure is going to be 8 to 10, roughly. I mean,
about 8.
8 by 8. Mm-hmm.
It's 4 acts that break into 2 little mini stories.
Okay.
And that's a great way to structure. And if you think about it, writing a 120-page screenplay or a 200, 300, 500-page novel is pretty intimidating. But if you break it down to these small, digestible chunks, not only do you get that page-turning pace that Marlowe likes, that makes a bestseller, that keeps people awake at night, it's also much easier to digest and write because you know your story so well.
And before, just because we're starting to get close on time, I just want to put the handout here. This is a handout that follows along with this. So if you want some actionable tips and a summary of some of the things that John's talking about, you can check out that handout, and hopefully we'll also put it in the chat as well. And if anyone has questions as we're going, feel free to shout them out. Okay, go ahead.
Sounds good. I'm almost to the end. So the next story is when Luke realizes he rescues Princess Leia. They go through the belly of the beast, as Joseph Campbell would say. And then this story ends when they escape the Death Star, but at a cost. And in a way, that's when they lose Obi-Wan Kenobi and they escape the Death Star. Now, the next 15 minutes is them getting to their next journey. It sort of mirrors the second half of Act 1. But they escape, and Luke mourns the loss of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And in a strange way, he mourns him more than he mourns his uncle and aunt. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is because Luke is realizing that Obi-Wan Kenobi has just made a great sacrifice. And Luke is probably going to have to do the same thing. He's recognizing in his mentor his own journey. So they arrive at the place of safety, and now comes the final act. And this act is the martyr act, because Luke is willing to put his entire life on the line. So you have a 15-minute mini story where they prepare for that attack. They learn their lessons. Luke loses one by one the last of his support systems. Han Solo runs off and leaves. and the attack begins. And the last act is that final, all cards are on the table. It's the desperate moment. This is the moment of martyrdom. They fight, but Luke starts to get his helpers back. Obi-Wan's voice is heard. Han Solo returns and says, Yahoo! And the Death Star is exploded. And then they have the medal ceremony at the end. So you know that this story has ended, but there's still more world out there. The world has continued. So if you think about it again, what you're looking at, by the way, my drawing looks a lot like a stegosaurus, doesn't it? Someday, I keep telling myself I'm going to have a real artist do this, but don't hold your breath. So it's basically lots of little stories. And each of these act breaks or mini story breaks are points of causality that, again, make what happens next inevitable. So if you've had a Marlowe analysis, and I forgot to add the E there, so sorry about it. This is a Marlowe misspelling. But if you've had a Marlowe analysis of one of your novels, and if you haven't, you really should. You're going to notice it looks really familiar. Luke can talk about this probably better than I can, but these are the narrative beats that Marlowe, this is my own novel, Raven Wakes the World, by the way. And as you can see, the beats that Marlowe identifies as having really, really good pacing are almost exactly that same structure I just showed you. So if you want to write the type of story that is what Marlowe's recommending, this is a method to do it. And by the way, this is us again with our contact information. If you'd like to get in touch, this is my email, and that's Lou's. Please reach out. We'd be happy to talk to you. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, John. That was really helpful. Yeah, when you were talking about mini stories, that is perfect for Marlowe's structure because she plots out what we call story beats or narrative beats, which is action that happens. And in a bestseller, or what popular novels have shown in the past is that spacing them out every 10% roughly is key to keeping your readers engaged and keeping them turning the pages. So that lines up perfectly with everything you just taught.
But and also thinking about them as a series of arcs. I think that if you think of your story as one big arc, which obviously you need to do also, it doesn't really complete the job. The job is to take each of those beat points and have within that beat point a complete arc. When you do that, then the story is just always moving forward.
Right. So you're telling a big story that's made up of lots of little stories.
So if you notice as an editor a book lagging in the beginning, Lou, would you suggest adding a backstory or adding another
I think depending on the kind of novel, but what I would definitely suggest is adding more tension points, because that's if a story feels like it's starting slowly, or more significantly, if a story feels like it's dragging in the middle, it's often because the writer knows where they want to go at the end, but haven't built in the tension points along the way. And that looking at structure this way makes it easy to diagnose.
And by the way, I wrote Raven Wakes the World before I knew about this, and we ran the illustrations you just saw were from Raven, but I didn't really understand the structure at that point. What I did understand was that I was following the structure of some of the the wonder tales and mythology of the indigenous peoples of the American North, the Inuit people and others. And those wonder tales follow the same exact structure. So this is not something new. It's something that goes back to our cave painting and campfire days. It's a rhythm that we all understand in our hearts. It's how we understand the story works. It's like music has a structure to it, and understanding how music works lets you do more with it and lets you be more creative. Understanding how story works gives you the same gift.
Well, even like
it's why episodic novels tend not to have large audiences. because when the story is just continuing,
Right.
it's much harder to engage.
And going back to just the basics, like, I mean, it's when you're telling your kid the bedtime story and you're making it up, and you can tell, like, you have a point you're getting to, but you're losing them. So suddenly in the middle of it, you have to have like a dragon jumps in and, you know, something that catches their attention. So I think you're right. Like going back to caveman days, like they understood, like you have to keep the reader interested, and you do that by smaller stories along the way.
It's the old quote about when in doubt, have two guys come through the door with guns.
Yeah. Or throw a dead body in the mix, right? If it's getting boring. We are already out of time. Is there anything you want to say to wrap up, or anything you didn't get a chance to cover that you want to include before we sign off?
I think I covered everything I can think of.
That's it.
Red Makes the World makes a great Christmas gift. Blue makes a great gift.
And it's available now in
Even
ebook,
as we speak.
paperback. Okay.
Hardback.
Hardcover.
Perfect.
And it's beautifully illustrated.
And we'll put a link in the comments as well, so you can check it out there. And if you enjoyed this event, please show us some love by sharing this video, following our channel, or reviewing our podcast so other book lovers and authors can find us. We do First Draft Friday every other Friday right here, however you're watching it. So I hope you come back. And thank you, John and Lou. It was so great to have you. I really appreciate your time and all of your wisdom. So thanks for coming on First Draft Friday.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, guys.